If you don't cut the check, Mr. Thorne, the board is going to take the property. It's that simple. Those were the first words thrown at me by a man I'd never met, standing at the gate of a property I had bled, sweated, and nearly bankrupted myself to buy. I remember setting my mug of black coffee onto the hood of my rusted Chevy Silverado, the metal hot enough to sear skin, and just laughing, not the polite chuckle you give a neighbor, but the dry, sharp laugh of a man who knows he's staring at a joke that doesn't know it's a joke yet. "You're trespassing," I said, my voice low, barely carrying over the wind kicking up dust from the dry creek bed. "And unless that clipboard of yours magically turns into a badge and a search warrant, you've got about 3 seconds to get off my dirt before things get uncomfortable." The guy hesitated, looked nervously back at the pristine, pearl-white SUV idling at the end of my gravel drive, and through the tint, I saw her, perfectly frozen like a statue in a museum of bad intentions, Karen Sterling, the self-appointed queen of Pineview Estates. She didn't say a word, just raised her phone, snapped a picture of me standing there in my stained work shirt, and drove off, leaving a cloud of dust that tasted like entitlement and trouble. I realized right then, staring at the taillights fading into the heat shimmer, that this wasn't about money or dues. It was a declaration of war, and I had bought this farm to escape people exactly like them. But if they wanted to fight, they had just stumbled onto the wrong veteran. 3 months earlier, I was standing in a courthouse that smelled like floor wax and desperation, watching an auctioneer try to offload a forgotten slice of earth known as Parcel 42A, 160 acres of nothing but sagebrush and silence that nobody wanted because it was unimproved, which is real estate speak for too much work. I raised my hand when nobody else did, the gavel slammed down like a gunshot, and just like that, I was the proud owner of a ghost farm. I wasn't running away, exactly, but after 20 years working as a cartographer and land surveyor for the state, spending my life arguing over inches in courtrooms where truth was flexible and lawyers were sharks, I needed silence. I needed a horizon that wasn't sliced up by skyscrapers or subdivision fences. The first week out there was healing. I parked my refurbished Airstream next to a leaning barn that looked like it would collapse if you sneezed too hard, wired up a solar grid, and lived on canned beans and silence, sleeping without the intrusion of streetlights for the first time in forever. The neighbors from Pineview Estates would drive by occasionally in their luxury sedans, slowing down to gawk at the crazy hermit, fixing fences in the sun, but I didn't care because the deed in my glove box was my Bible, and it said clearly that I was outside their jurisdiction, outside their manicured lawns, and outside their control. I spent my days clearing brush, grading the road, and imagining the dry pond full of water again, dreaming of a sanctuary, until Sheriff Jim Reynolds stopped by, a good man with tired eyes and a handshake that felt like sandpaper. "Heard you bought the old Holloway place," he said, leaning against his cruiser. "Folks over in the HOA are twitchy. Caleb, they like to think their rules apply to anything they can see from their patios, so don't let him bully you." I laughed it off, thinking he was being dramatic, which was the first mistake I made. A week later, the white SUV showed up, gleaming like a spaceship in a mud puddle, and out stepped Karen Sterling, a woman who looked like she ironed her socks, holding a clipboard like a shield. "Excuse me," she barked, not asked. "Are you the squatter?" "I'm the owner," I said, wiping grease from my hands. "Caleb Thorne, can I help you?" "I'm Karen Sterling, president of the Pineview Estates Association," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, a smile that was all teeth and threat. "We've had reports of unapproved structures and heavy machinery. You'll need to submit architectural plans immediately." "Ma'am, check your maps," I said, fighting the urge to roll my eyes. "This isn't your land, isn't your community, and isn't your problem. We redrew the district lines last quarter," she said sweetly, dropping the bomb with casual cruelty. "You'll be receiving your welcome packet soon." She spun on her heel and left, and that night, sitting by a campfire that flickered against the vast darkness, I drank whiskey and read my deed over and over, confirming I was right. But her words redrew the lines stuck in my gut like a splinter because I knew how bureaucracy worked. It was a weapon used by people who didn't know how to use a shovel. The silence of the farm started to feel heavy, like the calm before a tornado touches down. I spent days pounding fence posts into the red clay, trying to convince myself she was bluffing, until the knock came on the metal door of my trailer, A hollow, authoritative thud that demanded attention. Two guys in neon vests labeled Community Compliance Force were standing there, one looking like a kid on his first day, the other looking like he enjoyed evicting grandmothers. "Morning, Mr. Thorne," the kid said, handing me a thick envelope with a glossy logo. "Welcome to the neighborhood. Your retroactive dues are $6,000, payable immediately." "6,000?" I asked, looking at the envelope like it was radioactive. "For what? I have my own well, my own solar, and my own road." "Refusal to pay is a lienable offense," the older guy grunted, shifting his weight. "Just take the papers, sir." I stepped out of the trailer, barefoot in the dirt, and pointed to the barbed wire I had strung up myself. "That wire is the border between reality and your little fantasy land. You step over it again, without an invite, I call the sheriff." They left, muttering threats, but as I watched them go, I felt the shift in the air, the smell of ozone and diesel, the sense that I had just poked a very large, very stupid bear. I called Sheriff Reynolds that night, and he sighed, the sound of a man who knew paperwork was coming. "They're claiming the county expanded their charter," Reynolds said. "I'll look into it, Caleb, but these people have lawyers on retainer who cost more than my department's annual budget. Be careful." "I don't need lawyers," I said, staring out at the sunset bleeding purple over the hills. "I need ammo, and I don't mean bullets." I walked the fence line as the light died, trying to clear my head, when I saw a glint near a post, a flash of reflection that shouldn't be there in the organic chaos of nature. I knelt down and dug out a plastic rock, a fake, hollowed-out stone hiding a camera lens and a transmitter, a high-end surveillance bug planted on my land. My blood ran cold, then hot, boiling with a rage I hadn't felt in years, because this wasn't just a dispute about dues anymore. This was an invasion of privacy, a violation of the only sanctuary I had left. I found 3 more that night, dismantling them on my workbench under the hiss of a propane lantern, staring at the circuitry and realizing Karen Sterling wasn't just annoying, she was hunting. I had spent a lifetime drawing maps for other people, defining boundaries for the state, but now, with the wind rattling the tin roof of my barn like a drum roll, I decided it was time to draw a line that they would never be able to cross again. The next morning, the farm felt different, like it was holding its breath, waiting for the other shoe to drop. It started with the rain, a relentless gray drizzle that turned the dust to slick mud, and when I stepped out to check the mail, I found a sodden piece of paper taped to my gate with blue painter's tape. A notice of violation for unapproved landscaping and unsightly vehicle storage, referencing my truck, my lifeline. I tore it down, the wet paper disintegrating in my hands, and threw it into a puddle, watching the ink bleed out like a dying promise. But Karen and her Pineview Estates goons were just getting warmed up. By noon, I heard the mechanical whine, a high-pitched mosquito sound that wasn't natural, and I looked up to see a drone, a sleek silver phantom hovering 50 feet above my property line, its red recording light blinking like a cynical eye. It wasn't just passing through, it was grid-searching my land, mapping my life, invading the one place on Earth I owned. I grabbed my binoculars and watched it, muttering, "You want a show? I'll give you a show." But instead of doing something rash, I grabbed my camera and started documenting the drone, creating a log, because I knew that in the world of law, he who has the best paperwork wins. I called Sheriff Reynolds again, and he sounded exhausted. "It's airspace, Caleb, it's a gray area," he said, and I could hear the frustration in his voice, but I told him, "Sheriff, if that thing comes low enough to scare my chickens, it's going to have an accident." The real escalation happened 3 nights later. I was asleep, the kind of deep, exhaustion-fueled sleep you only get after physical labor, when my phone buzzed on the nightstand, a motion alert from one of the trail cams I'd hidden in the scrub oak. I pulled up the feed, grainy green night vision, and saw 2 figures at my main gate, cutting the chain with bolt cutters. I didn't yell, I didn't panic. I pulled on my boots, grabbed my Remington 870, unloaded, but terrifying enough in the dark, and stepped out into the cool night air. I crept toward the barn where my generator hummed, the heartbeat of my farm, and saw them. A young kid I recognized from the community, roster as Braden, Karen's useless son, and another guy holding a flashlight. Braden was kneeling by the generator, reaching for the main power cable, and just as his hand touched the rubber, I racked the slide of the shotgun. CHHCHHK. The sound was louder than thunder in the silence of the country. They froze. "You boys looking for a shortcut to the hospital?" I asked, my voice calm, terrifyingly steady. Braden scrambled back, dropping the wire cutters, his face pale as the moon. We're just enforcing the noise ordinance," the other guy stammered, shining the light in my face until I raised the barrel just an inch, and he dropped the beam to the dirt. "Cutting power lines is a felony," I said. "Now, pick up your tools, fix my gate, and tell Karen if she wants a war, she better send soldiers, not children." They ran, tires spinning in the mud as they fled, and I stood there in the dark, shaking not from fear, but from the adrenaline of knowing that we had just crossed the point of no return. The next morning, I went on the offensive. I called Sarah Jenkins, an old friend and the scariest real estate attorney in the tri-state area, a woman who ate bureaucrats for breakfast and picked her teeth with their regulations. I told her everything: the trespassing, the vandalism, the drone, the forged boundary claims. "I'm looking at the county GIS right now, Caleb," she said, her voice typing fast in the background. "There's an overlay here dated 3 months ago that puts your land in their district. But this is weird. It was uploaded at 11 p.m. on a Sunday." "Who signed it?" I asked, already starting the engine of my truck. "A clerk named Linda Graves," she said. "Karen Sterling's cousin." "Caleb, this is fraud. This is massive." I felt a cold smile spread across my face. "Paper trails burn, Sarah. Let's light a match." I needed undeniable proof, so I called in a favor from Elena Rossi at the State Geodetic Survey. She came out with equipment worth more than my house: laser rangefinders and GPS units that could measure a gnat's eyelash from orbit. We spent 2 days mapping every inch of the eastern boundary, and her data was conclusive. The HOA's map was a digital forgery, a lie drawn with a mouse click to steal 100 acres of my land. But I knew Karen wouldn't stop just because I had a map. Narcissists don't believe in reality unless it hits them in the face. So I set a trap. I found an old, capped well on the south edge of the property, a relic from the 1950s, and I fenced it off with bright orange warnings: "Federally protected aquifer. Do not disturb." I made it look crucial, forbidden, and irresistible. Then, I sent an anonymous tip to the HOA board claiming that Parcel 42A has illegal drainage blocking the community's water flow. It was the bait. For nights later, the storm rolled in, thunder crashing like artillery fire, masking the sound of engines. I watched from the darkness of my barn loft as a heavy excavator rolled onto my land, escorted by Karen's white SUV. They were arrogant, sloppy, thinking the storm covered their tracks. They tore through the fence and started digging right where I knew they would, straight into the protected zone, trenching across the aquifer cap. I snapped photos, high-resolution evidence of them destroying what they thought was just dirt, but was actually a federal violation trap. Karen was there, in a raincoat, pointing and shouting orders, implicated in every shovel of dirt. I whispered to the rain, "Gotcha." The article dropped 2 days later, written by Mike Daniels, an investigative journalist who had been itching to expose the corruption in Pineview Estates for years, but never had the smoking gun, until I gave him a cannon. The headline screamed, "HOA or organized crime. Forged maps and nighttime raids in the county." It went viral locally within hours. Whistleblowers started coming out of the woodwork. Betty Miller, a former treasurer for the HOA who had been bullied into silence, met us at a diner with a stack of ledgers thick enough to choke a horse. She showed us the money trail. Dues collected from annexed properties like mine were being funneled into a slush fund used for Karen's personal renovations and consulting fees to her cousin Linda. We went to court on a Tuesday, the sky a bruised purple, matching the mood in the room. Judge Holloway presided, a man known for having zero patience for stupidity. Karen walked in with her legal team, looking confident, pearls shining, unaware that she was walking into an execution. Her lawyers started blathering about community standards and administrative oversight, but Sarah Jenkins stood up and simply dismantled them. She presented the time-stamped metadata of the forged maps, the video of Braden cutting my power, the photos of the illegal excavation, and Elena Rossi's state-certified survey. "Your Honor," Sarah said, her voice cutting through the room like a scalpel, "this isn't a misunderstanding. This is racketeering wearing a cardigan. They forged government documents to steal land, vandalized private property, and defrauded their own residents to pay for it. The judge looked at the evidence, then at Karen, who was slowly shrinking in her seat, the color draining from her face until she looked like a ghost. "Ms. Sterling," Judge Holloway said, peering over his glasses, "is it true you authorized the excavation on Mr. Thorne's property?" We thought it was necessary for drainage," she stammered. "On land you didn't own?" the judge snapped. "Based on a map your cousin forged?" The silence that followed was deafening. The gavel didn't just bang, it thundered. The injunction was granted immediately. The HOA's accounts were frozen. The board was dissolved pending a criminal investigation. In the weeks that followed, the Pineview Estate's empire crumbled. Karen was arrested for fraud and embezzlement. Linda Graves was fired and charged with tampering with public records. Braden took a plea deal for the vandalism. The county officially restored the boundaries, and the neighbors I had never met started waving at me as they drove by, free at last from the tyranny of the HOA. About a month after the dust settled, I was repairing the gate, the air smelling of sage and victory, when I saw a lone figure walking down the county road. It was Karen. She looked older, smaller, stripped of her entourage and her power. She wasn't wearing pearls. She stopped at the property line, looking at the barn, at the green returning to the fields, at the piece she had tried to pave over. "It's nice," she said quietly, her voice hollow. "The land. It's nice. Always was," I said, leaning on my shovel. "You just couldn't see it because you were too busy trying to own it." She nodded, a jerky, broken motion, and kept walking, disappearing down the road like a bad memory. I watched her go, then turned back to my farm. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the grass. The bees were humming in the hives I'd finally set up. It was quiet, real quiet. I had won. The line held. But as I stood there, listening to the coyotes start their evening song, I couldn't help but wonder about the nature of ownership. We fight for dirt. We bleed for lines on a map. We destroy each other over inches of ground. I was the good guy in this story, sure. I defended what was mine. But looking at the wreckage of Karen's life and the scars on my own land, you have to ask yourself, is justice about restoration, about making things whole again? Or is it just about making sure the other person hurts more than you do? Because standing there in the twilight, with the battle won but the war still echoing in my head, it didn't feel like a celebration. It just felt like survival. And maybe, just maybe, that's the only victory we ever really get.